Yes, I am right here. I'm gonna share my screen. Here we are. All right, awesome. Can you guys see that? All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Rodriguez, and I work within the water quality program at the central office in Madison. And I usually am the POWTS plan reviewer for small POWTS and mixed POWTS. All right. So what is regulated by the DNR? We regulate large POWTS systems and mixed systems. So that would include systems with a design flow rate of greater than or equal to 12,000 gallons per day, and systems with an actual flow rate of greater than or equal to 8,000 gallons per day. This will also include a mix of domestic and industrial wastewater at any flow quantity. Okay, it is important to note that for these thresholds, anything within 1,500 feet from each other does count. So if there's one private sewage system located near another one, within that distance, it would count towards those 12,000 and 8,000 gallon limits. So now what is considered domestic wastewater? Well, typically any discharge from plumbing facilities in private dwellings or commercial domestic establishments. And for reference, commercial domestic establishments would mean any establishment which has the capability to collect, treat, or dispose of domestic waste. And then I have some examples. So like restaurants, country clubs, mobile home parks, motels, and hotels. I put restaurants in bold because of this next note right here. If the wastewater is above DSPS limit concentrations for domestic wastewater, that is considered high strength waste, but that does not make it industrial and therefore does not need DNR concurrence. All right, what is considered industrial wastewater? Industrial wastewater would be considered any processed wastewater and waste liquid products. Some examples would include silage, leachate, water containing additives, any wash water generated in industrial, commercial, and agricultural operations would be some examples. All right, and here's another fun note. These systems may not be used to treat commercial laundromats, motor vehicle cleaning, and motor vehicle maintenance wastewaters unless it can be proven that specific factors exist which would allow the wastewater to be adequately treated. Therefore, if it's not deemed that it can be adequately treated, we would recommend these wastewaters to be collected in a holding tank and hauled to a municipal wastewater treatment facility for disposal. All right, now what should a submittal have? We would need the contact information of the owner and treatment system designer, the address or legal description of the treatment system location, the general description of the overall site, the description of the type of activities that will produce the mixed wastewater, the general characteristics of it, and the approximate design flow rate splits. Any description of the treatment system, and along with any proposed supplemental preliminary treatment, the description of any solid residuals generated by the wastewater, and how these materials will be collected or disposed.
Laura, I have a question. Could you go back to the slide just before that, please? So this talks about subsurface absorption systems that can't be used for commercial laundry, laundromat, motor vehicle cleaning, and motor vehicle maintenance. So when you say subsurface, does that mean below grade, or does it also mean a mound or an at grade or something like that? So like
all of it.
All of it. Okay. All right.
Yes, all of it.
I wasn't
Thank
sure.
you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, all of it. All right. Any other questions?
There is a question in the chat. What if a campground wants to have a laundromat? Would that be a commercial laundry?
That will most likely have to go to a holding tank.
Okay.
Yes. We're concerned with the type of toxic chemicals that would be going into the system, which is why we would not allow that to happen. All right, any other questions?
I'm not seeing any in the chat right now.
All right. Okay, I think I was here. So who can submit this? Generally, the designer would need to have a Wisconsin license number, so that would typically mean an engineer or plumber. And where are submittals sent? We accept electronic copies, which can be sent to the DNR Mix POWTS review at wisconsin.gov email. And if you choose to submit hard copies, that would be mailed to Jason Knudsen at the address right there. All right, and just for reference, what does this DNR assess? Well, we assess the nature and source of the industrial wastewater component, the potential for impacts on the treatment system and the groundwater quality, and we would recommend any supplemental preliminary treatment steps. If it is determined that the industrial wastewater will have characteristics similar to or no stronger than domestic wastewater, and there's no concerns for groundwater quality, the DNR will issue a concurrence letter stating that the discharge of the industrial wastewater component to the treatment system is indeed acceptable. This concurrence letter will generally also request the owner to contact the DNR wastewater staff person in their area to determine the potential need for coverage under a WPD's wastewater discharge permit.
There is a question too, Laura. So you mentioned in one of the slides that it needed to be a Wisconsin license number. I don't know if it can be, is that a plumber, or can it also be a designer of engineering systems? That's a designer license number.
That is a great question. Yes, it can also be just a POWTS designer approved.
Okay.
Yeah, typically we have engineers and plumbers submit this stuff, but that is also acceptable.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, are there any other questions? I'm at the end here, and that's my email if you have any questions and would like to reach out with any specific questions.
All right, and then do you have more on the large POWTS, Laura?
No, I do not. Large POWTS would be analyzed by a municipal plan reviewer.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm not a municipal plan reviewer.
Okay, so when there is a submittal for a large POWTS, are there things that need to be taken into consideration when designing those? Like, is it always required to have the nitrate removal in a large POWTS? And then how is it, do you know how it's looked at? Like you mentioned the 1,500 feet or the 15, within 1,500 feet, if there's smaller ones even within 1,500 feet, then how are those addressed? Do those require nitrate removal also?
That is a great question, Cece. A lot of these cases are, it's analyzed on a case-by-case basis, highly dependent on what the groundwater quality in the area already looks like.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be a case-by-case basis analysis.
Okay. And then there's a question here back to non-domestic. Do all industrial wastewater sites require a WPDES permit or just certain ones?
Just certain ones. So it would depend on the type of industrial waste going into the system, which is why it would have to be further analyzed by the regional wastewater engineer in the area. Yep.
All right, the DNR website says large systems are two systems, two systems under the same ownership. Do homes under the same ownership count? or I'm assuming that question means, or is it only public use or commercial use?
Great question. Homes would count. Anything under the same ownership within that 1,500 feet limit.
Okay.
Yeah, would count.
Okay. Yep. So Laura just explained that they have, Laura from Waupaca County said we have they have a Bible camp with over 80 homes. And so if it's all under the same ownership, even if it's on different properties, maybe they're all on one property, they all would apply. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I know that this case is getting looked at by a municipal plan reviewer because it is taking all of them into account. It is a large POWTS system.
Okay.
It's over 12,000 gallons. So yeah, it's on a case by case basis, and they're looking at analyzing what the groundwater quality in the area already looks like in order to analyze what is going to be required moving forward.
Okay.
Laura, Jerry Swim here. I know hi. Good morning. I've got the one question that when you go on the DNR website, there is the one form 3400. That's it is the 35, or excuse me, the 3400-185 non-domestic holding tank submittal form. It's kind of like that self-approval. Can they use that form, or is it where you said earlier to submit to that other email instead of using the form, the DNR form?
So that form, the holding tanks reviewer person is different from me. Her name is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah, so her name for reference is Samantha Schwartz, and she would look into everything related to holding tanks, and that would be a form that would need to be submitted to her for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, and then I guess one thing that I wanted to emphasize too, and you did kind of emphasize it in your slide too, is about restaurant wastewater. We're hearing of some situations where counties have questions about when it's high strength wastewater that it needs DNR approval, and I guess it's a good time to maybe just talk about that a little bit, where sometimes, and you did a good job of explaining, but sometimes people will have high strength wastewater, and maybe they'll split flows, and maybe the kitchen wastewater from a restaurant will go into a holding tank, and the rest of the wastewater from the bathrooms and different things that aren't high strength might go into another system. And I think there might be some confusion sometimes that holding tank wastewater now requires an approval from the DNR because it's considered non-domestic. But the truth is that does not, it's still considered domestic wastewater. It just may be high strength. And is that correct, Laura?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I think that's a point that we need to just help people understand, is that there's a difference between non-domestic and high strength. And so are you seeing some of those applications come in that's happening?
Yes, I do see them, and I usually just redirect them to the appropriate DSPS staff in the region.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. Well, I guess if there's other people who would like to unmute themselves and ask questions of Laura, now would be a good time. If I know a lot of times we get questions about the subsurface discharge, and is it all right if a car wash goes to an on-site system, or does it have to go to a holding tank? And it sounds like what you're saying from that slide that you showed is that they would have to go to a holding tank unless they could show that they are treating their wastewater to a certain capacity.
Yes, that is right.
Okay.
Car wash effluent is quite hard to approve on our end nowadays. So holding tanks would be the best choice for that type of effluent.
Okay. And then they probably reuse and do that kind of stuff too. Okay, are there other questions from DSPS staff? Oh, here's one from Travis. Do existing sites that would meet the 12,000 gallons per day within the 1,500 foot setback need to be brought up to DNR nitrate and WPDS code, etc.? Examples like that Bible camp or campground.
Yes.
Okay.
Short answer, yes, they would.
So it's an existing site, nothing is being done. And Travis, maybe that's not your question. Maybe you want to just unmute yourself and ask the question. But so it's maybe nothing's being done on the site. Is that what you're asking, Travis? Or is something being done on the site?
No, Cece, can you hear me?
Yep, yep.
No, it's just a general question, you know, because there are some sites out here. I think I have everybody's attention here, especially the county folk with that question. There's a lot of sites out there that may fall into this category that aren't necessarily being regulated by the DNR. Laura, does that make sense? You know, they're sitting out there. And I guess, you know, to further extrapolate on that question, you know, do they need to be brought up once something changes at those sites or another system's added? Okay. Laura, does that make sense?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, were these systems, I'm going to assume these systems were never brought up to the DNR in the first place.
Yeah, well, yeah, we had that memo out there that's being reviewed, you know, further up right now, right? So that would directly relate to that. You know, we were kind of working under that memo before this.
Yeah. Yeah, and any system with a design flow of greater than 12,000 gallons per day should be brought up to the DNR's attention. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of like a retroactivity question would be, I guess, a way to put it, right? So
yeah, because they're existing. I am going to say that it should still be brought up to the DNR, just so there's no issues further down the line.
Dave Donnelly from Juneau County brings up another question here, like existing mobile home parks. So, you know, we have those, you know, spread out across the entire state, and some are small and some are very large. I think a lot of those would all of a sudden fall under this category. And I think everybody, especially the county folk out there, are listening real close and thinking about, you know, mobile homes in their counties and how many, you know, gallons per day they are producing. So I just wanted to point that out to you.
Thank you, Travis. That is a wonderful question. I think that if there is doubt, it is better to run it by the DNR if you think your system is above 12,000 gallons per day design flow. Yeah, that would be my take on that.
And this would only be triggered if there was something happening at the site, like tank replacements or system replacements. Is that correct, Laura, or would it be triggered at any point?
At any point.
Okay. So even if we discovered there was a site that was generating more than 12,000 gallons a day and no WPDS permit had ever been permitted, then they would need to be notified that they need to obtain some kind of permit.
Yes.
Okay. Or they need to contact the DNR to see if there's a permit required.
That is accurate. Yes.
Okay. All right. Question, wondering if the DNR is going to sample waste for PFAS. Does that occur?
Great question. PFAS are not really regulated right now. So my short answer is no, but that may be something of the future.
Laura.
So there's a county person worried that they're going to get tarred and feathered, but this county person is actually, it's okay for him to get tarred and feathered. Hey, Donnelly. All right, Louis, did you have a question? Or Travis, maybe you do.
Yes, Laura, while we have 70 participants here, maybe you can go over an example of, say, there's a pre-existing mobile home park, and they're operating at 15,000 gallons a day, and the DNR, is unaware that, they fall under that 1,500 foot rule. Can you walk us through what that mobile home park has to do, and maybe some of the costs involved, or just kind of give an idea? And this extrapolates up on Dave Donnelly's "we are going to get tarred and feathered" comment.
Yeah, great question, Travis. So the process would be similarly to what I outlined before with the submittal. What should the submittal have? We would just need all of this information. And like I said, it's very case dependent because mobile homes are more spread out, right? So there might be multiple systems in the area, and it's very groundwater quality based dependent on what is going to be required of them. So if they do believe that they're exceeding the thresholds for this, a good starting point would be to reach out to the DNR and submit all of this for review, and it would be case dependent on the area, on the quantities, what is going into the system. Yes, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So it's safe to say, Laura, that there's a possibility that if the groundwater is in good shape and there's a lot of separation, for example, there's a possibility that things may not change very much on those sites.
Yes, that would be accurate.
All right, thank you.
All right, does anybody else want to unmute and ask a question? Louis, I thought you, oh, there's Mark. Okay, hey, Mark.
Yeah, no, I guess, on this subject that you're talking about with the mobile home parks are kind of probably a common one that we're going to probably see being affected by these large scale rules. And a lot of them, may have scattered systems, little cluster systems serving the manufactured home community, or even a campground. Large campgrounds are the same thing. So if a person is going to say add on to a manufactured home community or add on to a campground, more units, obviously they're going to have to create a new on-site system for that development. And I guess what you're, and I guess the question is, and I think maybe you answered it, is that now obviously the new system will have to come into compliance, because cumulatively you will be over, say, a design flow of 12,000 gallons a day. So that one would have to meet the nitrogen requirements, which are what, less than 10 or less? Is that right, Laura?
Yes. So if you're adding on to a campground and it goes over the threshold, that would require DNR involvement, and it could require nitrogen treatment depending on the groundwater quality of that area.
Okay, so now will these owners of these developments, for all the other little cluster systems that are out there, are they going to be mandated or told that they have to do denitrification for each of those existing systems as well, or just the new system, or just the new system for the addition?
Great question. It would likely not be for every system. It would depend on the groundwater quality area where those denitrification treatments would need to be established. So it would not be every single system, most likely, no.
So if you're out in the central sands and the sandy, if you're in sandy type soils, you may have to do it, versus maybe being on a site where you might have sandy loam or clay loam soils or silt loam soils.
Yes, and it would also depend on the already existing nitrogen
Right.
in the water, in the groundwater of that area.
Okay. And then at some point there has been some requests, but I think it's like, oh, when you go over 15,000 gallons of water a day, we actually have to put in monitoring wells. If you exceed 15,000 gallons of water a
That
day.
is a great question, and I'm not familiar with that because I haven't dealt with large POWT systems. But you could email me that question and I could get the answer from one of our municipal plan reviewers for you.
Right. Who's dealing with that these days?
There's a few municipal plan reviewers. It depends on the area who gets
Okay.
assigned what. So
Okay,
yeah.
got it. Thanks.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Lewis.
Yeah.
I have a question about kind of like the progression. So daily flow can be subject to interpretation, like depending on who's deciding what the flow actually is on a proposed facility. So if you have a relative idea that it's going to be over 12,000 gallons a day, does your application go to DSPS first and then they involve the DNR, or is it the designer or the master plumber's job to contact the DNR and get their approval before it goes to DSPS? Or how does the progression work is my question.
Okay, so I guess I can start. So usually we do it jointly. So when I've seen these in the past, we get an application and it all comes in jointly. Now I realize with ISLA, DNR doesn't use ISLA, the programs are different. But most of the time on these large systems, what happens even before it gets submitted on ISLA is that we're communicating by email all together jointly. So the DNR person, the designer, the plumber, and usually the DSPS wastewater specialist for that area kind of get together, by email, and the designer sends out information, and everybody kind of gets a chance to pre-review it and answer questions or address problems that they see, excuse me, or things that need to be addressed ahead of time. So that's how I generally see them.
I would concur with what Cece said, and off of that note, I do accept the paper submitted to DSPS. A lot of it touches on the stuff mentioned on this slide, so a lot of the times I get the paper submitted to DSPS and the details about the industrial part of it in addition to that. But yes, jointly it is the usual way.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, the procedure would be to, if you have a proposed system to treat wastewater from a certain facility that, would be considered a large system, you would contact your district wastewater specialist, the county, the DNR, and everybody, get them together like on the site, or like just talking on email about that.
Well, yeah. Excuse me. It can happen several ways, but yeah, basically, it doesn't necessarily have to be on site. Generally, the plumber's or the designer is going to prepare all the paperwork, right? So they're going to have done the soil test. They're going to have figured all this stuff out and come up with a design that works, and or that they feel works, and and then we talk about it. I guess that's how I've seen it. I don't know if there's other wastewater specialists that have done it differently, but that's what I've seen.
I get that, but I get plans that are approved by DSPS, and then counties re-review them and have different ideas about things and stuff that was.
Yeah, I don't see that happening on large POWTS over 12,000 gallons a day. I haven't really seen that happening. A lot of counties aren't, they're kind of like, yeah, I don't really, they trust what, if it's been approved by DNR and DSPS,
Yep.
they're generally gonna be okay with that.
Okay, so to answer my question, if it's even considered to be close to that threshold, that if time is important, then contacting the DNR as soon as you have a design together would be the appropriate step.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And two, with non-domestic, what I'm aware of with non-domestic situations is that you can send that submittal in for a holding tank for non-domestic at, ahead of time, and then include that approval letter with the plan sent to DSPS. So DNRs, they're going to put a condition on there that says that, if it requires DSPS approval, if there's concurrence on non-domestic, then they're going to put that condition on that approval letter. If it's but from us, we're not going to approve it. DSPS isn't going to approve it until we get that letter from the DNR for non-domestic concurrence. So that's how we do it in those situations. Jared's got a question here. What percentage of non-domestic wastewater triggers when DNR has to do the full POWTS review versus giving a concurrence so the DSPS can do the review? So I believe that's when there's domestic and non-domestic. So what's that percentage of domestic wastewater, Laura, that gets, that gets commingled before it's like, okay, no, it's just the DNR's reviewing it?
If there's no domestic water going into the system, that's where it would just be the DNR. As long as there's some domestic water going into the system, it would be a concurrence.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ted brings up about a well setback. Yes, that's important to recognize that there may be community wells in some situations, and we've got greater setbacks. There's a question about old lake plats with 50-foot lots. Okay, so Jean, I'm not sure. Okay, so this, what we're talking about with large POWTS is all under the same ownership. If the same person owns it, even if it's on different property, Laura, is that correct? That it could be different lots, but if it's all under the same ownership, then that's where the large POWTS comes into play. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So Jean, I think if you're asking if old 50-foot lots that are close together and a combination, if they're under different ownership, no, that does not apply. Okay, phew, thank you. So, okay, other questions, Travis?
No, I think Wapaka County, their site is a Bible camp. I believe it's on a lake. Speak up if I'm wrong, but there's a number of lots, maybe 80 lots that are owned by the Bible camp. So Laura, it's kind of a double standard, right? People are out there thinking, going, well, you got all these lots tight to each other, but they're all owned by separate owners, so they don't fall under this, right? But now you have all these owners that maybe, I don't know if it's rented or what they are, but it's the same owner. So now they gotta, possibly comply with, these standards that they're, at the end of the day, everybody's thinking about, where these sites are in their county or their district, like me, and how much money it's going to cost these people, and what kind of fight that might bring on. So that's not so much a question, more so a comment.
Yeah, and I guess Laura addressed that, if it, I guess, to bring everything into compliance. So, okay, this is we're kind of opening up a new chapter here, and recognizing that, all right, we're greater than 12,000 gallons a day, and we need to somehow contact the DNR to make sure that either no WPDS permit is required or one is required and no changes need to be made, or one is required and changes need to be made. So those are the three things that we get to deal with. It sounds like. So
Yes, perfectly put. Are there any other questions?
I have one more question.
go ahead.
Laura, I know you use the word holding tank quite a bit, but as a licensed septic operator, we don't pump industrial waste. We're licensed to do septage. So now you take a kitchen and put it to a holding tank and call it industrial. Who services that? I mean, I'm a little confused by calling it industrial when it comes from a laundry or kitchen.
Kitchen wasn't, Lewis. Kitchen.
Oh, I thought if it was under a certain amount of gallons, it was.
No, that was what
Okay.
we said, is that if it's a kitchen, that might be high strength wastewater, but not non-domestic.
But we're calling it from a campground laundromat industrial.
You're right. That one is
So
new to me. Yeah.
Who pumps that and where does it go?
Great question. That would depend on the type of chemicals being used. And I haven't really seen on my end how this is handled. But I can get back to you on that if I could have your contact information.
You can. I mean, we just refuse anything that is not, that we're clear is not septage or domestic. And so it's getting harder and harder with people that has something that's, catch basins, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we're not going to be able to service these things, we shouldn't be installing them, or there should be a way to have it so that we can do it. I mean, that's, so if we're pushing holding tanks for everything, there should be a place for it to go. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but prior to today, I guess I would have never thought that a laundromat would be industrial wastewater. Would you have, Lewis?
This is Matt from DSPS. I think the difference here, or I guess Laura can explain this better, but I think the difference is laundromat as opposed to like a self-service laundromat, which is traditional washing machines like you'd see in a house, as opposed to a commercial laundromat. I don't know if there's any kind of difference from your end, Laura, but I think traditionally we have always looked at laundromats that are like self-service laundromats. I mean, they're in the DSPS code as being able to go to a land-based system.
Yes, Matt, that is a wonderful way to explain it.
So I don't think we're talking about going to the DNR and being put into holding tank. I think we're talking about more like commercial laundromats, not ones that are like self-serve laundromats.
What's the difference between a commercial laundromat and a self-serve laundromat?
Commercial laundromats can be chemical cleaners, things like that.
Yeah, so it would
Like dry
depend on the
cleaners.
type of stuff that's chemicals being used. So if it's anything that would usually be used in a household, that would be considered domestic.
So Laura, Travis here. For example, in my district, I have a lot of migrant camps or, housing facilities for workers for different things. The laundromat associated with those can go into a POWTS, correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. In my district, I have a lot of migrant camps or housing, for workers seasonally. and there's, you know, a laundromat associated with those, and it's, I guess it'd be considered commercial, but them aren't the ones you're looking at, correct?
Correct. As long as the chemicals going into the system are things that would usually be seen in a household, then that would be considered domestic.
No, absolutely
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
So
I
if we
think
have
the
a dry
difference is
cleaner,
things like Aramark or something like that, that's running a
Okay.
commercial laundry, that's, you know, cleaning uniforms, things like that. That's an
gotcha.
industrial wastewater, as opposed to something that's connected to, you know, migrant worker camp or self-serve laundromat, things like that, or more traditional residential based.
Or a campground washing machine.
Correct. They allowed them to use a washing machine at a campground for the campers. That's, again, similar to residential.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Well, one thing to be aware of on these self-serve laundromats, a lot of times those have gone into holding tanks just because of, you think when you're washing your clothes, you know, there's a lot of lint that's being given off into the wastewater, and that lint doesn't really settle out into our settling tanks, our septic tanks, and it's going to bypass our effluent filters, and therefore it's going to go out into our dispersal area, and then those lint fibers are, a lot of them are inorganic, and so they just build up and clog up our we get premature clogging of our dispersal components. So some of those I've worked on in the past, you know, they've just gone to holding tanks just for that reason. It's kind of almost like dealing with kennels and dog hair.
Okay, so there was, Mark, you had asked a question about water metering for the Waupaca County site. And Laura, I just have a question about that. So if we can size systems based on a table that we use in SPS 383 appendix, or we can size systems based on metering flows for public use systems. Does the DNR accept metered flows also as a way to determine whether or not we're meeting that threshold of the 8,000 gallons a day estimated flow?
Yes, metered flows are great for determining this.
Great. And so there is another question too. At the beginning of our session, we talked about campground laundromats and thinking that they would be considered industrial wastewater. But I think our discussion right now just kind of explained, if we're using just regular soap, regular, you know, Downy or whatever, regular stuff in our laundromat, and we're not using chemicals or anything strong, that's considered domestic wastewater. Only if it's a commercial type of laundromat where they might be using chemicals, that's when it falls under the non-domestic. Is that correct, Laura?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Wouldn't they launder, not to keep beating a horse here, but wouldn't they, any kind of self-serve laundromat, wouldn't that just be a high concentration? I realize they're domestic, you know, it's similar to domestic wastewater, but it's a very high concentration of it, similar to a restaurant. The reason why restaurants is high strength waste is because you're constantly cooking, right? It's cooking all day long. There's a lot of fat, oils, and grease. Whereas someone mentioned about the lint and then plus the detergents that are going in there, it's not like just one house or a duplex where you got two machines. You'll have dozens of machines that could possibly be running for 8 hours a day. Would that be something worth considering anyway? And the reason I'm asking is I've always been kind of led to believe that any type of self-serve laundromat, anything that's highly concentrated would be corralled towards industrial waste.
And what you're saying is because that's all we're doing there. We're not adding other kind of, you know, it's not a lot of bathroom waste, not a lot of other things. It's mostly just water and dirt and cleaners. Is that Is that what you're saying? And that would cause that concentration?
Yeah,
Okay.
correct. And then plus, if you take into consideration the campsite receptors, which I realize that's not industrial waste, but that's a high concentrate or a high strength waste just because of lack of water as well. To me, it seems like it would kind of make sense to kind of classify it as an industrial waste or something worth investigating, whether or not you want to do a subsurface dispersal or maybe go to a holding tank. I've always put them in holding tanks. And that was just by the design choice.
I think there's a couple different issues here. Is that, first of all, we're deciding whether it's DSPS regulated or it's DNR regulated, and that's the first thing. And so, if we're calling it an industrial wastewater, that's a DNR regulated wastewater. So, in our tables, we have self-service laundries similar to residential clothes washers. It's stated right in SPS 383, the appendix. Says residential clothes washers, so that kind. So self-service laundry are ones that would be similar in like a migrant worker camp or something like that. So those are DSPS wastewaters. Now, we have in our tables there, and we've all dealt with things, whether or not it's something that's a difficult wastewater for us to treat. Should we be putting it into a holding tank, or there are other things that we need to do to disperse it out into a drain field? Those are other issues that should be discussed. But I think the first thing we have to separate is whether it's an industrial wastewater or not. And these are not, so it's something that DSPS regulates. How we're going to regulate that we could talk about in further detail, or what should or should not be done. But we have to make sure that we really differentiate between it's an industrial wastewater or it's just a wastewater that has difficulties.
Thank you, Matt.
I have one more, just real quick one. So if you have a building and it has a floor drain in it, you have your bathrooms and you have your living area, and then it has a shop in it. Do I, as a designer for my POWTS, do I even have to even do anything with that? Do I have to draw it on my plan? Do I have to submit it? I mean, I'm not, if I don't do anything with it as a master plumber or designer or anything, do I have to show it on my plan and deal with it? Or can somebody else just do that?
So if it's a garage, a residential garage that has a floor drain in it, that can daylight. All right. If it has, if it's a catch basin, that's something different. So if you have a catch basin underneath that floor drain, then that catch basin needs to go to something, and that would be considered non-domestic wastewater out of that catch basin, even if it's residential. But once it becomes public use, or, commercial, anything like that, it's a different animal, and it can't be daylighted at that point, even the floor drain.
I understand that, but take a bigger facility and they have a domestic side of things, and then they have a industrial side of things. And the industrial side of things has floor drains where they park forklifts and do that kind of stuff. That's definitely not going to the POWTS. So do I even have to even do anything with that if I'm not working on that?
No, that gets directed to whatever you get from the DNR. The DNR would do approval for that. And those floor drains go to that system.
Right. So, but it doesn't have to, I don't have to show that on my plan to DSPS where my drains come from. So I have a floor drain in a restroom that goes to the POWTS. They have one out in the shop, and the site contractor has some other contractor do that. I don't have to show that.
You don't have to show it, but it's good to have it on there that, hey, there's this other tank that's going to be out there supplying the needs for this non-domestic. I mean, if you're installing it, I've done it in the past.
No, but I mean, even if I wasn't installing it, I mean, typically I like to stick to the things that, I wouldn't have anything to do with that.
Right. Well, if you're not having
correct.
you
wouldn't need to show it, but you should document what else is going on. Because if we see a facility and we know it's a large repair facility and we know there's things in it, and you're saying,
Yep.
I'm just handling the bathrooms, we're
Yep.
going to hold that plan up saying, where's everything else going?
I
So, I
understand.
mean, it's part of that plan. You say, you know, I'm documenting, I'm putting in a drain field for whatever 20 employees here,
Yep.
and there's other wastewater and drains and
Yep.
that's being held separately, you know, or handled separately, or that's being handled through the DNR, or it's a
Okay.
separate tank or by others.
Yep.
That's fine. You can document that, so we understand that that's not being routed into the POWTS system, or we know it's taken care of separately. So we're still going to want to know that information, you know,
Yep.
what the detail. No, you're not going to have to document every single drain and where it goes and what that system is, but you know, we're going to ask in those kind of facilities that are industrial in nature, or
Mhm.
possibly have could be in common with industrial wastewater. We're going to ask what's going on in those facilities. And so as long as you explain that's going elsewhere, we're okay with that.
Awesome.
All right, well, we are close to 9 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Laura. This has been a great discussion, and we really appreciate it. I think it's been very helpful for all of us. So yeah, if you are ready to sign out, you can go ahead and put your name and credential number in the chat, and you will get an hour continuing education credit for today. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Feel free to reach out with specific questions to my email right there if you have any.